Hello, everyone. Welcome to the DMV Business Show. I'm your host, Otto Sevilla, and today I have a very special guest for you. We have Margaret Lefton. Margaret is the head of marketing and programming for yours truly, DC. Welcome to the show, Margaret.
Thank you so much. So excited to be here.
Thank you. The pleasure is all mine to have you on. For those out there in the audience who may not have heard of yours truly, DC, what is this? If you can just give a brief general overview of what you guys are.
Yeah. So Yours Truly DC is a really cool, unique boutique hotel that opened in 2020. So still kind of new to the DC scene. It's really different. It stands out than the other hotels in the area. It's got this, as soon as you walk in the door, extremely like creative, quirky, sassy vibe that's just really out there from a lot of the more like colonial sort of huge column buildings that you see in DC. So you walk in and you're going to see, crushed orange velvet and disco balls and a really cool bar in the center in what we call our living room. There's a lot of unique pieces to the property. So right when you walk in the door, you'll see a Call Your Mother in the corner. The hotel living room space is a co-working space that's free until 4 p.m. every day and then transforms into Mercy Me, which is our sort of South American cuisine restaurant. There's a back patio that we call the Neon Jungle, filled with plants and neon signs. We have 14 event spaces, including really unique things like ping pong rooms and pantry rooms. And it's just a really great time. It's one of those places that's just like, as soon as you walk in the door, you kind of get the energy of the space, and it's very buzzy and fun. And there's always stuff going on property.
Yeah, I saw it. I wish I was there, and I'm sure I'm going to get a tour hopefully in the near future. But
Definitely, anytime.
thank you. But just from the looks of it, it's very unique and pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
I know the parent company. It's a big company, but this brand, yours truly, are you the only one here, or where are you? Are there any other locations?
Yeah, we're the only one. And again, in DC and Dupont Circle area, we are part of the IHG Vignette Collection, which is a collection of like hyperlocal boutique hotels around the world. And we are the only US based hotel under that collection, which is very exciting for us. And yeah, so standalone, but part of a really incredible collection that we're proud to be a part of.
That's pretty neat. Do you know the plans are to open others as far as this collection and brand all over the country or
Yeah.
globally?
So Yours Truly will be standalone in it
Okay,
as itself. The collection itself does plan to open more both globally and within the US, but I can't share more details at this time.
sure. And that's under a different name and brand, though, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Got it. Okay, okay. So going now, switching to sort of personal, are
Yeah.
you from around this area, the DMV?
So I'm originally from Connecticut. I moved down to the DMV when I was about 23.
What brought you down here?
So I've had a very windy journey, which I'm happy to sort of like back up and walk you through because it might give you context to how I ended up here because it's quite random.
Yes, please.
So let's do it. So I like to say like I grew up doing a lot of textiles art. I was like, my grandmother was very in the textiles art world, and so as a kid she taught me basket weaving and needlepoint. And when I got to college and I studied at Skidmore College in upstate New York, I sort of stumbled into the fact that they had a textiles program, and I was like, amazing, let's do it. And so I spent my college years literally on a floor loom, until like 3 a.m. watching TV and weaving blankets and hammocks and what have you, and creating patterns. And I kind of like to always call that out because I kind of see, I'm not actively weaving anymore, but it's a lot of what I do now is like weaving experiences and stories and people into communities. And so coming out of college, I initially, from that background, moved into the fashion industry. So I had interned at Tory Burch for a couple summers during college on their creative team, briefly worked at an ad agency called Gray in New York City, and then was with Victoria's Secret on their photo team under the Pink brand for about a year. And then sort of was having, in my personal life, this existential crisis of like, I always wanted to move to New York City. This was the place to be. Like, I've grown up outside of it, all these things, and I just wasn't happy there. And so was trying to explore, what does this mean? Where do I go? Your classic post-college existential crisis. And had a few friends who were living in DC and one from New York who moved down to DC. And I just kept coming down to visit. And I was like, there's something about this city. I would have never in a million years seen it for myself. I used to think DC and I would just think the White House and didn't have any concept of it outside of that. And it was the first time that I came to Adams Morgan that I totally fell in love with the city. It reminded me a lot of my college town. It was small. It was a creative feeling. There was, Trist, the coffee shop, which to this day, I was just there yesterday, absolutely love. all these small businesses and shops, and the vibe around that neighborhood just really spoke to me. And I was like, okay, I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm going to move here. Like, we'll see what happens. And so really moved here quite randomly, basically just following a couple friends, and moved into a sublet thinking, you know, if I'm here 3 months and it doesn't work, I'll move back to New York City. And within a couple months, I was like, okay, cool, I love it here. And so at that time landed in this role with Richard Sandoval Hospitality, which owned a couple local restaurants that have since closed, but El Centro DF, Toro Toro, Masa 14, running all of their photography, marketing, and sort of this role wearing many hats, and really getting to dive in as a food photographer, which was very fun, you know, running around the city, getting to eat with friends. And from there had this travel bug for a long time, and really quite randomly stumbled into this role with a group called Hacker Paradise in South America, who ran retreats for digital nomads. And so I ended up in South America on what was supposed to be a 2-month contract as a photographer. And on my 7th day on the ground in Mexico, our facilitator for the group quit. And they were like, well, you work for us and you're already there. You're now the facilitator of the program. And I was like, oh, okay, guess we're going to get thrown to the wolves here and figure out what that means. And so ended up in South America for about a year, was in Mexico, Argentina, Uruguay, and Colombia before moving back to DC. Came back straight into a role with Kava on their marketing team, and was with them basically up until the pandemic start. And then had this really interesting, what I sort of call like side quest hero's journey for a few years during the pandemic, where, you know, in addition to my marketing background and doing some freelance, I studied a lot of more holistic practices. I briefly went to school for clinical mental health counseling out in Colorado, studied executive coaching, and through that landed in this really amazing role with this company called Summit Series, who is this fascinating company that runs retreats for holistic focused, self-growth focused entrepreneurs. And they host these retreats around the world, and they just launched a membership program. And so I had the opportunity to come in and run these really interesting sort of forum groups, basically like 7 to 9 entrepreneurs coming in and hosting this like vulnerable space for them once a week. And then shifting gears, like sort of ended up backing up with them and on their community team and programming team, and developing both digital and in-person programming for this membership community. And so essentially through this whole process, you know, the pandemic was sort of windy and all over the place, had moved out of DC, you know, as many people did during the pandemic, sort of shifting gears and trying to be all over the place. I lived on an island for a few months by myself, working remote out there, loved that experience. And finally was just like, it's time. I miss DC. I'm coming back. I found I always end up back here. So I landed back here early this year and straight into the role with yours truly, which has been just an absolute dream role and so fun to work in. We have the coolest team here. And again, because it's such a creative focused hotel, and that's really what they believe in, they really push, you know, any kind of creative out there idea. They're like, let's do it, which is just a really fun energy to be around.
That's awesome. Mark, you have such a rich and diverse background.
Thank you.
which is awesome. So I'm curious, you know, when it was time to move back, out of all the places you've lived in New York, even outside of the United States, always you thought about coming back to DC?
Yeah, you know, it's a fascinating experience that I think from an identity perspective, I'm always working through it myself, where I'm like, why? Like, you know, I've also lived, when I was in college, I lived in Europe for a bit, and have lived in many cities that I didn't even name here during various points in my life. I definitely have a very nomadic soul, but for whatever reason, the energy of DC has always been really connected with me. And I've tried to sort of sort through why is that? And I think part of it is from the first time I was introduced to DC, I just always found that people here were really down to talk and have conversations, like, and like meaningful conversation. A stranger that you meet on the street, someone you meet at a bar, someone you go on a date with, someone, you know, a friend you meet, a roommate. People are really willing to just get to know each other. The city's colorful. There's green everywhere. It's a walking city, which I love. I'm a huge walker. I walk 30 minutes to work every morning. I'm like always out and about. And I think on a base level, you know, it's interesting, like having the US government based here, I'm kind of like, if you get into the nitty gritty on that, that's people who want to support the community of America. And I'm someone who's super community driven and builds a lot of creative communities. And I'm like, maybe that's what the overlap is. I couldn't tell you, but I absolutely love it here. And I love the creative scene here because it is a lot more intimate than, say, New York, and you really get to know everyone in it. And, you know, coming back after being away for 3 years, I grabbed coffee and it was like no time had passed with, for instance, Maya Oren, who is the head of brand experience at the Line Hotel. And, people who I worked with early in my career who we're all kind of still here and like doing our thing and love it here and want to build the creative scene out. So
it's funny you mentioned that. I was talking with an entrepreneur recently. He's originally from Chicago, well, Chicago suburb, just outside of Chicago. And he grew up there and then moved to Miami, lived in Miami for a while, working there and everything. And now has been in the Maryland area, the DMV area for, I don't know, for a long time. And I was asking him this sort of the same thing, I mean, two great cities, Chicago, Miami, and now sort of DC, Baltimore area. But he was like, the thing with the government, and he was like, it's such a stable economy. We're very unique as far as other places in the country where major cities, whether LA, Miami, New York, Chicago, whatever, but the government and all these government contractors, you feel if there's lows, you feel the lows, but maybe not as you would in other metropolitan cities in this country. It's such a stable, and it's so true, and it is.
That's right. I actually hadn't thought about that perspective as well. It's super interesting, but yeah, it's just for me the right energy, I guess. In whatever that means, still figuring it out.
Do you see, as far as, and I know it's too early to tell you, you don't know where things will take you, but permanently maybe DC, or who knows?
Yeah, I think about that a lot, actually. As I'm getting into my 30s, it's something that definitely is front of mind. And I think, I grew up sort of actually like 50% of the time in Connecticut and 50% on Nantucket, an island off of Cape Cod. And I think the only other place that I could see myself living that isn't here would probably be moving back to that island. But that said, like, I do love it here. I who's to say?
Yeah.
I also never say never, because my nomadic brain, I say one thing and I end up in another country. So, but I suspect no matter what, I'll always have roots here and end up back here in some form or another.
With such a diverse experience behind you, you mentioned all these, big brands you've worked under, whether in the creative, marketing, and what was your favorite, you would say, out of what did you pull from all of them?
I pulled, it's so hard to answer that question because I genuinely pulled incredible things from each of them. Like, I think the easy answer that's kind of very quick to jump off of was just Tory Burch, because it was my first job, really set the tone for a lot of the rest of my career. I was working at a place that's similar to here, like extremely valued creative at the forefront, poured a lot of money into it, told the creative team to just run wild and do whatever they wanted to do. And I was working around a lot of just brilliant creative minds. And so learning from those people and their aesthetic and the way that they thought, I think set me up in such good soil to grow from for the rest of my career. Like, I still think that actively impacts me more than any other job I've had. Working at Sandoval and getting to do full-time photography basically was incredible. Like, that really developed my eye for that. And then I, can never say enough good things about Summit Series, who I worked for, who I got to meet all these incredible entrepreneurs from all different categories around the world. And then you're sort of at the center of it and getting to connect people and weave people together in different ways. And then getting to be here and getting to do sort of a similar thing, but for my local community, bringing creatives and entrepreneurs in the door and getting to really learn about the nitty gritty of the operations side of programming and event production has been invaluable to me. So much from all of my experiences. I could talk for hours about each one, but those are some quick highlights.
So speaking about creatives and here locally with yours truly, DC, how are you bringing them into the hotel so they can experience it and hold events there?
Yeah, it's been I've taken a few different routes because in my head, the vision was sort of like, we have this, again, we call our main space the living room. And it's this gorgeous space that just, yells creativity as soon as you walk in the door. And I was like, more people need to know this exists, because the hotel opened in the middle of the pandemic. And so there wasn't a lot of programming going on, and, or there was, but then it was cut off and it was a lot of push and pull. And so I found that a bunch of my creative friends in the area didn't even know what the hotel was or had never set foot in the door. And I was like, I think if people just visually see it, that's kind of a step one. And so there's been a few different routes that I've taken through this. So one of them is as simple as just bringing creatives in the door, come grab coffee with me anytime, which, I would offer up to anyone listening to this podcast. Please feel free to reach out. Like, I'm always up. I will host you for Call Your Mother. It will be great. We will sit, we will talk about life. So we've done that. We've done the programming route, which has really spanned a lot of different things. We had probably my favorite event we've hosted to date, which was just such an incredible experience for me, was hosting one of my favorite artists of all time, Sarah Baba, who's an international photographer. for a book signing because she had just put out a book that was sort of an autobiography in combination with sort of a history of her photography and art called Dear Love. So we hosted her for a signing, and it was this great experience because when I reached out to her, which this all happened through a DM on Instagram to someone who has over 1 million followers, she was like, so funny, you know, I have had so many random messages coming to DC, like telling me to come to DC for this tour. And it's just not a city I would have ever thought of, and have no idea, like, where do you go in the city? Who are the key players? What are the hotels? Like, where do I host an event? And I was like, cool, I got you. And so hosting something like that, where it's a major name and get then, you know, people coming in the door for that. We've hosted all kinds of classes. We had a sewing class, like a sewing 101 class with a really talented artist, Evan Ibrahim, a couple weeks ago. Marcella Kriebel, who's an amazing local watercolor artist, has come in and taught classes. We're hosting a quarterly, and actually the second one is this coming Sunday, vintage market with all of these amazing vintage vendors. So we have like 20 vendors coming in the door in combination with like tarot readers and wellness practitioners and artists, and like sort of this whole combination of making a market that feels really exciting the second you set foot in the door. So again, all that to say, a lot of different venues. We're also hosting So Far Sounds concerts and Don't Tell comedy events. And it's just coming at it from every angle and creating a space that when people walk in the door, they're like, oh, something else is going on here. Cool. What's happening?
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I mean, just to show you how the DM works. You mentioned this photography artist, and
Real.
Real.
That was incredible. I certainly didn't expect that to turn into great. I bought a flight and I'll be there, you know, next Tuesday. And I was like, okay, let's go. We're going to produce this event in 10 days for you.
Yeah. So as far as building this relationship with the local people here, I guess it's just you having to outreach and going out there, telling them, hey, here we are. This is what we have. Look at it. Come take a look, please, type of thing.
You know, I'm someone who loves talking to people, right? So it's as simple as like reaching out to entrepreneurs who I think are cool in the area, or who somehow message me. Maybe they heard what my position was and are interested in hosting an event or whatever it is. Mm-hmm. And I'm such a believer in a one-on-one conversation before anything else, right? Like the relationship building is so much more important to me than sitting there and immediately being like, so business, what are we doing? So it's really just as simple as meeting people who seem great, bringing them in for coffee and sitting down and getting to know their story. And then from there, kind of ideating on, oh, you know, what would actually be a really cool event? Like we had this artist, Shenya Parrish, who did this really unique event called Canvas Vibrations with us, where she partnered with, you know, after I met her and had heard about similar things she had done, we partnered her. She brought in her musician, which was an electronic violinist named Andalou. And so for 4 hours, they set up in the main space in the lobby with our windows open, and Andalou was doing a live electronic mixing with violin over it, while Shenya was basically intuitively painting in response to the music. And then we also had a floral artist on the ground who goes by the Capital Flower Fairy, Yasmin, she's fabulous, who decided to donate a flower installation for that, so that there was sort of this whole created archway. So I guess I see it again, back to the weaving thing, as like, I meet all these different people, and just by hearing their stories, it gives me like, oh, what if we put this person with that person, and then created this new idea?
Sure. Wow, it's beautiful. It sounds like it.
It's fun. It's
yeah,
fun.
Yeah. You know, with the hotels, obviously one of the main things, you know, besides hosting programs and events, is obviously filling up the rooms, right?
Yeah.
So how many keys does a hotel have?
Oh, I don't know the exact number off the top of my head. I want to say it's, I'm going to get butchered by my team for this. I want to say it's 255, but it might be a little bit upwards of that.
Okay. So the goal, and I know you're sort of responsible for the marketing, the programming side of things, is also filling up the rooms, right?
Yeah, so it's interesting. We actually, the framework that I was sort of laid out, because I've only been here about 6 months now, and the initial way that I came in and ideology we came in with was less the focus on immediately translating to a revenue stream, and more the focus on, we want this place to be known, right, in the community. We want this to be something that people know the name of the hotel, that they know that there's stuff going on there, that it's a place to look at, that like people have been in the door, that it has this buzzworthy thing, and it creates a little bit of a buzzworthy center in Dupont or West. And so that was kind of the initial focus. And right now is actually where we're sort of like shifting that gear into a little bit more like, okay, now that we've sort of created this vibe around the hotel and this energy and the name, how do we now turn that a little bit more into the revenue facing stuff? And there's, you know, some more specific details around that, around, you know, at one point, the restaurant within the hotel space, Mercy Me, was managed under the hotel. That's transitioned to be managed by a separate company. So that also shapes a lot of our strategy initially it was let's drive revenue into the restaurant. Now that's a separate revenue stream from the hotel. So now my focus is more around how do we get people interested in the rooms? How do we, think about this from a different perspective? Are people wanting to rent the event spaces, et cetera? So
Sure.
kind of different ways of thinking about it.
But for the events and the programs that you hold there, I mean, I don't know, maybe it's case by case or things are differently. There's typically revenue there, right? Or I guess not at the beginning, just because you're trying to get the brand and the name known out there.
Yeah, I would say it would be more the latter. Like the revenue stream isn't necessarily linked directly to the events, mostly because I was more interested in the perspective of I really believe in building goodwill and partnerships, right? And so I'm not interested in bringing in an artist who's been abused by a bunch of event spaces who take 60% of their tickets. I was like, come in the door, I will donate the space to you, and you can host whatever it is that you want to host as long as it's on brand for us, and I'll also be there to produce. I do all the photography of all the events. I do the social media, like I'm kind of, Swiss Army knifing across everything. So it's more just making any creative who's involved with our space feel loved and taken care of. And that's kind of been my forefront. And then, then it's starting to, once the relationships there, shift into where's the revenue piece of this. And it's subtle things, right? Like if we're hosting a watercolor class, it's been really interesting to learn about the operation side or thinking about flow of events. So as simple as putting a menu on the table of everyone who's taking the watercolor class and sending a server out, right? So they're ordering dinner while painting, and that's revenue for us. So it's just small shifts and thinking through that kind of MO.
I love this, Margaret. You're speaking now music to my ears when you're mentioning about community and building community. It's funny. I was just talking to one of my former guests, trying to get her on the show. And, she's asking questions about the show and this and that, which is normal. And then one of them is there a fee that she would have to pay to be on the show? And it took me aback a little bit. And I'm like, no, there's no fee. It's free. I'm using, it's like, again, when you're trying to build a brand, a community, I'm using
totally
this platform as just a way to highlight you and, you personally and your business or whatever organization you're involved with and your story. There's no fee, but I guess there's a lot of people out there you sort of have to pay to play. And I'm like, no, not at all. My business is commercial real estate. And I actually stood up this show during COVID times when my business was sort of slowing down. And I've always thought about like just a local show highlighting all local people. There's a ton of podcasts out there that are fantastic that I listen to myself, but nothing just locally here for
I was so excited when the PR team sent over the show, because there was actually a couple of creatives and I who a few months ago were talking about this, where we're like, there's so many creative voices in DC who like kind of just get missed or passed over on the national level just because it's not, you're not in New York or LA or what have you. And so you're not getting the Vogue mentions or the, major Forbes mentions, Thrillist mentions, whatever. And, we have District Frey, which is the local magazine that addresses a lot of the creatives in the community, but I didn't feel like I'm a podcast girl, like to the end. Because I love walking, it's like, I can walk and learn.
Yeah.
And we talked about exactly this, where I was like, I don't know if there's a podcast that interviews the local creatives, entrepreneurs, people who are doing interesting things in the city. So I was so ecstatic when this got sent over. I was like, someone's finally doing it. This is great. And I totally missed that it was there. And I'm so thrilled about it.
Yeah. Yeah. So I
definitely
started
a white space you're covering. So
thank you. And I'm always looking for great guests. So if you know anyone, that who might be interested in sort of sharing their story, just like you are here and what they do, I'm open ears, please.
Definitely got you. Was already thinking of sending you a list after this.
But yeah, it's just like that, just about building a community. And she asked me that question. I was like, no, not at all. I mean, she's been on, we had a great time and her show's already live, but it's just like that when you mentioned about building a community. So if someone's listening and they want to sort of do something similar as far as build a community, any pointers as far as what they should think of or how to lead?
Yeah. I've done so much prior to joining yours truly, because I was sort of both with Summit Series, but freelance over the last few years. I've done a lot of community building consulting. So if anyone ever wants to just shoot me an email and kind of ask a question, feel free. But it really depends. It's hard to answer that question because it so deeply depends on what is the community you're trying to build. Is it a digital community? Is it an in-person community? There's so many different questions you can ask about, like, what is the language that's shared by your community? What are the traditions that are shared? What do they gather around? Why do they gather? What can they do in community that's bigger than what they can do alone? general goals, I think I have a list somewhere on my website, which is just my full name, margaretlefton.com. I want to say under like some community page, there's a list of questions to ask yourself. But I think starting with just sort of a brainstorm and like, you know, I'll cop to the fact that I'm a huge ChatGPT person. So like even jumping on ChatGPT and being like, hey, I want to build a community around XYZ. Give me a list of like 30 reflection questions I should be asking when I'm jumping into like building this. Another like resource that I use a lot. But yeah, I'm always happy to talk about that. It just varies based on what you're trying to do. Like I would give you very different advice around if you were just starting the podcast right now and you were like, how do I start building this versus a hotel community versus a membership community versus, you know, what have you.
Sure. Well, let's start with me then. So the podcast, the DMV Business Show, you're familiar with it now. How would you say would be the best way to sort of grow this and
You know, what I think is incredible about podcasts, and, you know, I've floated the idea with myself of starting one before, but it's just, I've never like felt inspired enough to go through with it. But the coolest part is people love talking about themselves, right? So it's, I mean, I'm sure you already know this because you're doing it, but you can basically hit up anyone and like ask them to be on a podcast, especially when you catch someone who's doing something really cool and just by nature somehow hasn't been on a podcast yet or hasn't been featured. People love to tell their stories. And so it's likely that you're going to get a yes, and you're going to get 30 to 60 minutes with someone who you might in any other context never be able to get, you know, in front of because they're super busy or not interested in an informational interview or whatever. And so you sort of get that access. But the cool thing is if you get a ton of people who have followings themselves and they want to share that they've told their story, it's like it's such a great, from a social media perspective and marketing perspective, starting point of just so much exposure by just all of these people sharing this. And if somebody listens to one episode and is like, oh my God, this is great, the interviewer's great and I like it, I want to hear another and now I know what the show is, DMV local, okay, cool. So then, you know, now I want to hear more episodes and oh, now there's this cool person that I didn't know about in DC and like maybe I'll hit them up, and now I'm interested in following you on Instagram because I want to see if you post another person who looks cool that I maybe want to listen to their episode. And I feel like that sort of podcasts have a really natural growth to them that I love. And then I could go on a whole other rant about social media management and like how important it is to respond to comments and, you know, DM people, but like in a personalized way, not like a thumbs up or liking the comment or a smiley face, like cracking a joke back at them or like making it an actual conversation versus a generic bot response. So people feel like they're talking to a person, and that can make all the difference too. And that's how I've built a lot of relationships on social as well.
And you're also the one who oversees the social for yours truly, DC?
Yeah, so we had an agency with us for quite a while, who's wonderful. Libby living colorfully. Libby she runs both a social media agency in addition to running like a store that does homeware goods and disco balls, which I believe is how we originally ended up with the disco balls in the lobby. So she's fantastic and supported us for many years up until a few months ago. And then I've sort of taken the reins more recently and have transitioned on. So it's sort of like a combination of, again, being in a creative role in a hospitality industry is so fun because you get to wear so many hats. I'm a photographer one day, I'm doing social media another day. All the stories are me. If someone's DMing you from the Yours Truly account, it's me. And yeah, it's a mix of different things, but yes.
That's great. I love this. What would you say motivates you, drives you, Margaret?
Yeah, good question. I've sort of done this, like these exercises before to distill down, if I were to put like one word to like, what is my driver? The word has always been belonging. So I think I experienced a lot of feeling a lack of belonging in my childhood, or feeling like I was trying really hard to fit in, or wasn't feeling seen so often that like that sort of got instilled in me as like something that I wanted to cultivate. I think it's, you know, sort of the double-edged sword of like that shadow is what's created such a strong community building MO for me. And that's extremely true in my personal life as well. So, you know, to talk about the non-career side of things, like I have lived in every type of housing situation you can imagine, anywhere from like 2 to 14 roommates. I was in a group house in DC with 8 roommates for a couple years, who is this community called Cali House in Adams Morgan. They host Porch Fest every year. I'm still incredibly close with them. I now live with a bunch of alumni from that group house in another group house up in Adams Morgan. You know, that's like a little bit more upgraded for those of us in our 30s, and a really nice space, and built out like an art studio in the basement where we host like art nights. And I'm community building in like 8 different forms at any given time. So I probably have too much energy most of the time, but Yeah, I think belonging and cultivating that for myself and for others is a huge driver for me.
So if I can go in there, so belonging. So growing up in Connecticut, which is where you were sort of, let's call it, raised, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Like, were you in a group? Did you feel sort of outsider from groups, being left out, or how was that as far as childhood in Connecticut?
So I think it's so interesting because you don't have context, right? Wherever you're raised, it's not like you know what anything else looks like. So whatever's
Hmm.
in front of you is the norm. And my mom had such a desire to live in Connecticut for a lot of her own personal reasons, and so my parents moved there to raise my siblings and I. And we were living in Greenwich, which is just a very elite area, which I think I experienced a lot of the downsides of. You're just constantly around things that center around money and talking about money and how much this person is making and how expensive this house is and who's wearing, a lot of the middle school was who's wearing the brand names, who's wearing Juicy Couture at the time.
Hmm.
Abercrombie's cliche. Do you have the Tiffany and Co necklace? Like so much that centered around that stuff that was really just, even as a kid, like just didn't resonate with me and really, I felt like had like a friction against my soul of just feeling like I didn't feel seen or connected. As evidenced by my best friend, my entire childhood was a girl who had moved from Lebanon to Canada to the US, originally speaking no English and learned English here, lived in New Jersey. And then I met her when her mom moved her to Greenwich. And we were best friends for years. And the two of us just sort of felt like these black sheep there. And yeah, I think for whatever reason, I never quite resonated with a lot of the people there and struggled to fit in and tried to solve for that by going to a boarding school for high school, thinking that would sort of remove me from the environment I was in, not realizing that it was just more Connecticut people in a more different location.
Okay.
And so it just created a lot of like these oscillations of just feeling missed somehow,
Hmm. Hmm.
emotionally. And that definitely like I think still sits with me as a scar, even though I've found so many spaces that I belong in, people who I love and click with in my adult life, like, ages 18 onwards. I think that's still like a really big part of who I am and what drives me.
Yeah. How was it after, how was graduating high school and going to college? Was it different or similar experience?
So I actually, I again have had such a nomadic life. Getting into my college years, like my freshman year, I actually went to a different school. So I went to a school called St. Lawrence University that was even more upstate New York than Skidmore, literally on the border of Canada, like into Montreal. And I did 1 year there, and it was kind of sort of by accident. Like I was just so confused and depressed my senior year in high school that I don't think I had a clear vision of where going to college made sense or where I wanted to go. And so ended up at that school kind of by accident. And I still have many good friends from that school, but it just wasn't a fit. It was sort of, again, more of that same culture.
Okay.
And finally, after that, I, followed a friend of mine to Skidmore where he was studying and totally fell in love. Skidmore was the first place where it was like, oh my God, everyone's creative and liberal and amazing and people care. And, I can do art and that's not like weird. And it was just, it was great. It was a really strong sense of feeling connected. And I think that was a really huge healing factor for me.
So it wasn't until you got there that you felt more at ease or more comfortable, I guess, with your environment and your the friends.
Yeah, I think, growing up when I spent time on Nantucket, that's kind of where all of my childhood friends are from, but that was a smaller portion of the year. And so I had it there, but it was very isolated, right? It was like once
Hmm.
you get to see all your friends and have like, this period of all your best friends. And then the rest of the year, I was like, why don't I feel this with other people? And so Skidmore was the first time I was like, oh my God, you can have this in normal life. Like you can just feel good and feel connected to people on a day-to-day basis and it not be this like scarcity factor of like, I'm only going to get to feel connected to people for like 3 weeks and then like run away.
Yeah.
But yeah, I love Skidmore. It is such a fantastic school, such a great place. And I still think about all the time, they kind of drilled into us this motto that they had, which was CTM, creative thought matters. And they approached that in every way, shape, and form in every class we took, whether it was a math class or a history class. That was like really part of the curriculum, was approaching any class you were taking from a creative mind. And that totally, has sat with me for over a decade now. Like that framed up a lot of the ways I think about things and being interdisciplinary and the weaving of different classes and different classes in college, now different businesses. I've worked in so many different industries now and thinking about how to take the food industry and apply it to the executive coaching industry and different things. So
That's interesting. So with that, I guess, perspective, as far as a creative mind, is it more just you introspect as far as how can I make this thing or whatever project more creative?
Hmm.
Is that how it was as far as?
I think it was more like it was sort of a joke when I was going to school there that I don't, did you watch High School Musical growing up or the movie?
Yeah, I've heard of it. I haven't seen it, but I've heard it.
Okay,
Yes.
fair enough. But a lot of the concept is it's like I'm a basketball player who wants to sing, and we can't do that because you can't be two things.
Ah,
And we used to joke that Skidmore was like the real life version of that because it was like the captain of the lacrosse team was also like a sculptor who would be in the studio until 2 a.m. next to you while I was like weaving. And and like so many examples of that. And the cool kids at Skidmore were the a cappella singers, and like we didn't have a football team, and it was a very out there place in the best of ways. But yeah, like I think it more just influenced understanding that almost creating like an entrepreneurial mindset that like things don't have to be one way, or you don't have to just follow the norm, or if people say do things this way, you can just be like step outside of that and be like, huh, why? I'm going to totally ignore that and do it a different way. Like,
yeah, yeah.
in as simple as so many of the jobs that I've gotten over the years have been through cold emails, like that I just arbitrarily thought a company was cool, looked up on LinkedIn who the right person was, and just reached out to them. And I will have friends who will be like, you can do that? And I'm like, yeah, of course you can do that. Like that's so simple to me and obvious. But uh yeah, I think it's more just understanding that you can think, it's such a cheesy phrase, but like outside the box, but really understanding you can like step outside the box, go back into the box, come out the other side, and build a totally new box out of different materials. Like, yeah.
That we just mentioned, that's great advice. Myself, my last two positions have me just reaching out to people,
Mm,
sort of cold, similar to
love
you.
that.
Yeah. So, and people graduating now are just looking through resumes online or job posting sites and then submitting resumes. But first of all, no one's really going to see that. I mean, they
Yep.
may, but
So true.
yeah, they may, but as far as getting a call from that is highly unlikely. Then, depending on whatever role, they might go the recruiter route, which maybe you have a better chance there. But what you did as far as researching companies that you liked and then finding people, right? Maybe it's reaching out to multiple people in that company cold through email or DM through LinkedIn or Instagram or Twitter or now X or whatever it may be. And I think that works. And I think more people need to do that.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I mean, I could do a whole separate podcast on just like career coaching and talking. I feel like it's such an important skill that isn't taught in school, which makes me bananas. At Skidmore, I happened to be in a graphic design class where my teacher believed in taking a full 2 class periods separate from our curriculum to be like, this is how you make a resume. This is visually what it should look like. This is what the typography hierarchy should look like. Here are the things you should hide, here are the things you should highlight, and how to do that with the font and formatting. And as simple as that. And then I happened to freelance for a career coach while I was in college. I sort of traded her some marketing advice in exchange for her teaching me some of these skills. And I just think it's so important, and more people should be aware of these things. It's like if you just submit to the black hole of 700 resumes, you could be the perfect fit and they just won't see you, and it's not your fault. So you have to stand out. And my career coach, who I learned from, always said to me, like, just think about it, because people get so caught up in their head about anxiety. Like, you're doing a recruiter or an HR person a favor if you reach out to them and give them a perfect resume for the job for them to send through to an interview versus them having to look through another 200 to identify another candidate. Like, you have done them a favor. And in the worst case, they don't respond or say no,
Yeah.
What do you have to lose?
That's so true. Speaking about careers, if someone's listening and they're saying, I love what Margaret does, working in the creative space, doing, holding communities or just marketing or whatever it may be, and they're like, I want to look into this. I want to maybe go this route as far as career. Well, what advice would you give that person?
I think, it's hard because my path has been so non-linear and windy, and there's so many pieces that I haven't even mentioned, just because I've had such a complex path. So for instance, when I was 23, I met someone named Adam Mincer, who this was when I was in DC the first time. He was a producer for CNN, and because he was coming from the journalism angle and I was coming from this sort of social extroverted perspective angle, we both kept talking about like, how do you have better conversations? And so the two of us just launched a group called DMC, Deep Meaningful Conversations, that I ran for 7 years, which was just gathering a ton of people in a room, sometimes 10, sometimes 45 people literally in my living room, to talk about life and interpersonal like topics and conversations, things like what we're talking about today, things like defining the concept of home, friendship breakups, just things that everyone goes through but doesn't necessarily have a defined space to talk about. And so that, doing that as a side project in my personal life that was totally for free and for friends, and how I made a bunch of my friends, was how I learned about community, because I built my own by accident without having that intention. I think if you're really looking to get into it, exploring, people who you find interesting in whatever work they're doing,
Mm-hmm.
trying to get coffee with them, and always think about the perspective of how do I make this easiest for them. So if you're going to cold email and ask them to get coffee, offer to meet them at their office or by their office, and you'll pay for lunch or coffee, right? So whatever you can do to benefit them in response. And I also am always really a believer on, if financially you have the means to do this, offer up to someone who you really admire or a company you really admire. I will work for you for 90 days, either for free or as an intern, like a paid intern, and just get your foot in the door. Because I have seen time and time again, if you can just get your foot in the door and prove that you're invaluable, they're not going to get rid of you. Like they will make a position for you. I've seen it happen countless times. So I always saw that as like, when I gave up, let's say, making money for 60 days to work for someone, it was an investment in getting a position that was maybe like, a $65,000 in my entry level year's position, that it was like, okay, I didn't make money for 60 days in order to get the position that I ultimately wanted, which I could have just been sitting that whole time job searching and getting no additional experience.
Mm-hmm.
So those are always my thoughts, but I'm very proactive and always about just taking more action and doing as much as you can.
No, that's all great advice. Thank you. Are there any specific traits you feel that you have, Margaret, whether traits or habits that have helped you, whether, in your career and business, let's say, or just personally?
Yeah, I think I feel almost guilty saying this one, because I don't want to, like, I'm definitely an extrovert, and that has benefited me a lot, but I don't want anyone who's introverted and hears that to, and again, those are just frameworks that are made up: extroverted, introverted, ambivert, someone define that.
Mm-hmm.
That has certainly benefited me. Like I have no problem walking up to a stranger and introducing myself and starting a conversation with them. I have no problem making new friends, no matter how old I am. I remember being 21 and having a friend say to me, like, I think I've made all the friends I need to make. And I was like, I will never understand that phrase. I always want to meet new people. I think probably the main trait that I really care about and value, which is irrelevant to whether you're extroverted or introverted, is just curiosity. Like I always have, I think it's on my website, the main phrase is like, lead with curiosity, right? And I think being seated in curiosity, I believe, is just like so beneficial, because I'm curious. It's genuine. Like when I talk to people, this is a rare instance in which you're asking me all the questions. I never have conversations like this. It's usually directly reversed. Like I will just sit there and ask someone a million questions about themselves, because I'm genuinely interested. If I'm talking to a florist, what does that look like? And I'm so interested in the nitty gritty. Like, how much does it cost? How did you find a wholesaler? What does that look like? What are the margins you make? Why are you inspired by this? How do you pair colors? Where did you learn? If I'm talking to an artist, what are you inspired by? Like, how did you learn to paint? Do you still care about it? Do you ever get sick of it? How do you balance like making creative work for work versus for yourself? Like, it's just following your curiosities and like letting that be, for me, my North Star has really been a lot of what's driven me. And I think a trait that has done me a lot of good.
I 100% agree with you with curiosity. I mean, that's one of the main reasons I also have this show is, my clients, just different business owners, entrepreneurs, that we would be in meetings and they would tell me part of their story. And I'm like, gosh, if just someone was just a fly on that wall, just listening how
I totally know what you mean.
Yeah, this person came with nothing from America, from Pakistan or whatever, and built whatever it may be their story. And it's just like, people need to hear this. And and also, I remember even at a young age, a little kid, and I would go to family gatherings, and, I would play a little bit with the other kids, but I would be more sort of that kid, actually the only kid, sitting maybe next to my dad or uncle, where the adults would just gather and they just talk about life, or this uncle or this aunt, or just maybe business, whatever it may be, just life in general. And I'm like the only kid there, just silent, doesn't say a peep. And I'm just hearing and taking it all in and observing and just hearing that story.
Archetype there coming in hot.
I'm sorry?
I was going to say the observer archetype there. Definitely.
Yeah, it's just hearing their stories, and the kids will be over there playing, jumping off walls, and I'll do that a little bit, but I just prefer to be just sitting there and just hearing this and just stories about whatever it is. And I don't know.
I think, I obviously, well, I resonate with that, but I also was the person bouncing off the walls. If you can't tell from my energy, it was a fun mix. But there's like one archetype they talk about called a seeker, who's just, it's basically curiosity, but phrased a different way. And I always love, like, The Little Prince was one of my favorite stories, both as a kid and as an adult, or The Alchemist. I was always into sort of dreamy, magical stories of people who are on these quests and curious. And I think one of the things I've grappled with as an adult is this bifurcation of like the pressure to, what I want to say is like niche down, like the traditional. My path is obviously so non-traditional. I have a friend who, has been in a consulting company for 10 years. I have another friend who's just worked their way up in accounting, and had very clear paths. And while I find mine interesting, and obviously I've chosen it, and I resonate with other people who choose weird, bizarre paths, although, a lot of my best friends are not necessarily that way, it can be confusing. Like, identity wise, it's something that I feel a lot of guilt about. It's, am I flaky? Is something wrong with me? Am I doing it wrong? Like, am I adulting wrong? What I sort of identified, like, what am I professionally? Am I professionally an event producer? Am I a photographer? Am I a social media manager? And seating it more from, oh, I'm professionally curious, that felt like a huge sort of relief off of my hands, where it's like, that makes a lot more sense to me. And I understand myself and how to navigate my career better now, and how to communicate my career better now.
Yeah. And also, a lot of people just want to put themselves in a bucket, like you said, niche. Totally. But why does it have to be, I am this or that? Why can't it be, I am this and that?
Totally.
And this and this? You could have a million interests. I mean, you can have whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
Like I've had people that are like, hey, you're in commercial real estate. Why are you doing this show? Focused on your business, on commercial real estate.
It's funny to me because I hear that, and I'm sure you agree with this. And I'm like, well, aren't you focusing on your business? Like, you don't think it's helpful to develop relationships with all the entrepreneurs in the area, and they have friends and they'll trust you and then go to you for, like, come on, that is developing your business. So if people don't see that, to me, again, that's that not thinking outside the box MO.
Yeah, it's different, and mostly these people may be a little bit older in age, but
sure.
It's just like, I'm just doing it from a different angle in a different way, but hey, to each their own, right?
Yeah, totally. I think it's quite brilliant as a business strategy for you, frankly. So I'm with it.
Thank you. I appreciate that. In life, in business, in your career, we all have setbacks, failures, whatever we call it. Are there any setbacks that you can remember right now that I guess were big, or sort of like your favorite fail, let's call it, and if so, what did you learn from that?
I was laid off once, which was at Kava, and I think at the time it was so interesting because I had this really weird year in 2019 where I was just getting back from that abroad year, and I came back and I was like, that's it. I'm adulting. I'm going to be consistent about stuff. I'm going to get a job. And even if I don't like it, I'm going to stay there. I want to find a relationship. I want to stay in one place for like more than a year. So I moved into a house. I started dating someone, and I got this job at Kava. And by the end of the year, I had been dumped. I had to move out of the house, and I got laid off from the job. And I was just like, what the heck? And was so, I think, angry and frustrated. And I remember the time people being like, oh, it's these moments where you figure out what you want to do, and everything comes into play. And I was like, shut up, I'm in pain right now, like, don't tell me this. And so I think, like, to get like more granular on the personal side, like I was very depressed most of 2019, and I'm someone who has also struggled with depression a lot throughout my life, and I think that's pretty common in the creative industry, but maybe I'm projecting. And I went through years of therapy. I mean, like, I think I was in individual therapy for close to 7 years. I was in group therapy for 3 years. I sort of now have what I call like booster sessions, where it's like maybe once every 2 months or 3 months when I feel I need it, I'll go in and see my therapist, but has been way less needed. But I think my mental health side of things really was a setback, and learning to manage that, where that would obviously take full priority over my career when that sort of came to the forefront. And so figuring out like how to focus on that for a few years and understand self-care techniques and how to take care of myself and how to feel better and have healthier relationships and all that helped me balance out being able to focus on my career again and like have more of a, because I've always loved my career. I love working. I love doing creative things, but it's having the balance in order to like be able to feed back into the creativity. Because if I'm not doing well here, nothing's coming back into the creative side.
Yeah. You know, I agree. And I think in life and in business too, we're always, I feel things, but basically everything's temporary, unless it's health, you know, and sometimes you can't fix that. But whether you're successful at this period of time, that's temporary. That could be different
about that
tomorrow.
all the time. Yeah.
Yeah. Whether you're going through a downturn, that's temporary. That could be, that hope that's going to be different in the future. And I remember I'm standing, now that we're talking about sort of lowest points, I don't know if this was my lowest, but I'm standing in front of my first ever investment property that I just purchased. I'm unemployed and my wife's pregnant. And I'm just like, fuck. I'm like, okay, you know, I need to put a lot of money into this property, which I don't have that much. And my wife's pregnant, our first child. But I'm like, okay, I mean, it was a great investment. There was, you know, there was a profit and now it's different. But again, everything's temporary. That's sort of the mind I try to look at, you know, the perspective I've tried to see things for. Yeah.
Something I've been reflecting on a lot. I'm pausing just because it's actively something I've been thinking about a lot recently. You know, when I left Summit Series, it was like I felt like I was at the top of my career, and then all of a sudden for 2 months I was like, I'm a nobody. Like, you know, I have no career, whatever. And then I end up here and I'm like, oh, whatever. And so it's been a lot of thinking through identity and like how much I think through the pandemic in particular, the identity got really wrapped up in the career because that was kind of all I could do, right? Like I used to be manifested through so many different venues, through my friendships, through the communities in my personal life, through all these different things. And then for 2.5 years, it was like, all you can do is work from home. And so I think trying to sort through, for me, this is like an active thought process around what does identity and career mean? What does balance mean? You know, how do you, I've found if I pour all of my creativity through the work funnel and I don't make any time for a personal life funnel of creative, you know, just doing an art project for myself, I completely burn out on this side. And that's been interesting to learn and be like, oh, maybe I like have to do stuff for myself, even if I want to throw it all into the work funnel, because it's like fun and fulfilling and you get tangible, immediate, you know. I think in the career world, it's so easy to get into for me, the workaholic mode, because as a people pleaser, you get the immediate, like, you know, gold star, good job, you did great, here's a raise, here's a promotion, here's, you know, praise and whatever, that it's easy to get pulled into that MO.
Yeah, no, it's true. Margaret, what would you say is your biggest challenge with your role at Yours Truly DC today?
Exactly what I'm just talking about. So it's been a really cool process. Well, cool at times, challenging at others. It's both what I'm celebrating and navigating, sort of around understanding my own limits on creative burnout and exactly where that line is, which I don't think I had quite explored prior, of like, oh my God, I love this job and I love this property and it's so cool. So I'm just going to pour everything I have into it. And then being like, oh my God, I'm completely drained. And so going through these cycles of just like intense creativity and then total burnout and then intense creativity and that push and pull without finding the balance was initially very difficult for me, and something that, like, I thank God I have an incredibly supportive team and they've worked with me very hard to make that sort of manageable for me and figure out like all the best ways to work together. And then me sort of figuring out what my own internal boundaries are of like, okay, yes, I can host 3 events per week and I'm really excited about every single one. And I'm going to be so dead at the end of the month. So even though I could, maybe I shouldn't. So a very interesting learning process, but very grateful for the team that I work on for dealing with me.
Yeah. You know, coming to an end here soon, what do you know now that you wish you would have known at the start of your career?
I'm not sure. I think partially maybe what you said earlier about, you know, everything's temporary. People can tell you that, but you don't know it until you experience it, right? Like I'm a decade in now. And so I have more of the lived experience of like, even though it feels like a certain moment might be the end of the world, I know from lived experience that's not true, because that's felt true so many times and not been true. And I think a lot in my, like, particularly right before I moved to DC, I can remember I had quit my job at Victoria's Secret. I had moved home with my parents, and I was back in Connecticut where, I didn't love growing up in Connecticut. So I wasn't a huge fan of being there. And I remember just being like, my life, like, this is it. My life is over. Like, I'll never have a career I like. I'll never have a job I like. I'm just going to live here forever and like never have a life again. Right. Classic, like 22-year-old thought. But it really felt true at the time. And that felt really heavy. And I remember I had a mentor who said to me probably around that time, I think I asked her like what she had learned. And she was like, the older you get, the more you're like, I forget what it's called on a car, like shock. When you go over a bump and it like sort of makes the whole car not super bumpy. I am blanking on the name of this piece of a car, but it's like your like shock thing gets like
the absorption shock or something.
Thank you. Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. That like it
Okay.
gets like better as the years go on. So like, the thing that used to rattle me to my core at 21 now is kind of like, okay, like, this is going to suck for a few days and then I'm going to feel fine.
Yeah.
So I think I've gotten better at navigating my own emotionality, I would say. And in terms of what would that advice be? Everything is temporary. It's gonna be okay.
You just mentioned a mentor here as far as the advice that they gave you. Any big mentors that come to mind? And,
Oh my God,
besides
so
this, what'd you learn from them?
I've had so many incredible mentors in my career. I feel really grateful. My first one would be Ali Lewis, who was my boss at Tory Burch, who just taught me an incredible amount about aesthetic and work ethic. And I mean, endless things I could say about what I learned with her, even though I only worked with her for a short period of time. And she now runs a fashion line called Rose Room Collection, which has been incredible to watch grow. Wendy Mata, who runs like a community herself. She's out in Virginia. She's like a 5th generation Bruja, Curandera, and initiated shaman. She is such a fascinating, terrifying, amazingly powerful woman. I love her so much. Pam Workman, who I just mentioned, who shared that advice with me, who worked with me at the ad agency, and we just stayed in touch for many years. And she's wonderful. I mean, my whole team here is just incredible. I could name off like 10 people who have just been great. And so many people at the Summit Series side too, like Jesper and Stromboline, who brought me on, everyone who I worked with as a facilitator there, who were just incredible human beings. Jody Levy, who's the head of Summit, who I didn't spend time with personally, but just watching her work was, I mean, unbelievable. So many people, a lot of women mostly, and I've sort of inadvertently ended up working with all women bosses my entire career, who have just been great to me. Like I feel I hear about people who hate their bosses, and I've honestly never had that experience, which I feel really grateful for.
That's awesome. What does your future look like? What are you most excited for in the next couple of years?
Great question. I'm someone who I'm so bad at future planning because I come up with ideas and then my life just happens and I go all over the place. I never expected to live in Colorado. I never expected to live in DC. So in some ways I sort of like to phrase it as I have this sort of mantra of you can't imagine, who knows? I can't imagine what's going to come next. And that's actually what I'm looking forward to, is life surprising me. But I think no matter what I'm doing, it's going to involve creative ventures. It's going to involve community, and, a rich life filled with travel and amazing connections. And I don't know, I've shown up in so many different seasons of my life, different ways. And I'm excited to see what is to come, even if I don't know. That's
great. Margaret, if people want to learn more about you and yours truly, DC, where can they find out more information, please?
Yeah, so yours truly, you can find our website at yourstrulydc.com, our Instagram at yourstrulyhotel. Again, if you follow, DM, like anything, or get a comment response, that is me. You are talking directly to me. If you want to find me, my website is margaretlefton.com, and my Instagram is Margaret Lefton, Lef as in Frank, Ton. And yeah, I think that's all I got.
Margaret, thank you so much. It's been a ton of fun.
So much fun.
I appreciate it. Thank you again.
Yeah. Thank you for everything. This has been great.
Of course. Take care.